Hey, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. As always, I hope you're keeping well. So for today's video, I thought I would do a mid-year favorites, even though it's a little bit late, but I thought it'd be interesting to talk about some of the other things that I'm interested in other than books. But obviously we're starting off with the books because we can't leave those out because I've read some stellar books so far this year. I'm also going to be talking about video games and films and TV shows and events and all that kind of thing that I've enjoyed so far this year. So without further ado, let's get into the books. First up, I have The Ruins by Scott Smith. This is my favorite book that I've read so far this year. This is my first 5-star read of the year, technically. It was just fantastic. Now, this is a book that I had been meaning to read for such a long time. So this follows two couples who have gone on vacation to Mexico. And while they're there at their resort, they meet up with other people who are also on vacation and make friends, as you do in these types of places. And they befriend two German brothers. And one of the brothers ends up taking off with this girl who is an archaeologist, and he goes out on a dig with her and he never returns. So his brother naturally is very concerned about this and he wants to try to find him. So both the couples decide to help this guy out and try to find his brother. And they also end up bringing some other friends that they've met there who don't speak any English but are still good crack, and they're still up for the journey that's ahead of them. Trying to find this archaeologist site is quite difficult because the locals won't really drive them past a certain point, and because of the language barrier and all that sort of thing, they're not necessarily sure as to why they're being deterred from going to this particular ruins. And once they finally make their way there, they find out that something really terrible has happened to the people who went on this archaeologist dig. And there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of terror, and I just loved how desperate this book made me feel. I felt like my serotonin levels were completely depleted once I finished it. And that's really what I look for in horror novels. I want to feel the desperation. I want to feel how the characters are feeling. And this was a very kind of claustrophobic, bleak read. And it was just so devoid of hope. And I think that's what I really enjoyed about it, because every time someone had an idea as to how to escape the situation, almost immediately come crashing down. It was just such a well-written novel. It really felt like while I was reading it, I was sitting on the top of this ruins with this group of people, and I was feeling exactly how they were feeling. It's such a fantastic summer read as well, if you're looking for that really kind of like sweaty, irritable kind of summer vibes. This is definitely one to check out. Another favourite was Foe by Ian Reid. I read this quite early on in the year and I blew through it. I read like 40 pages initially, and then the following day I finished the entire thing. And this is the book that I've so far this year binged through the quickest because I just couldn't get enough of it. I just found that I was just turning the page after page after page, and I was so wrapped up within the story. So this follows a young couple who have decided to forego the city in order to live a quieter, calmer life. And they're living out towards the country. They're kind of living on the edge of the city. And the wife is someone who wasn't really a city dweller. It's more so her husband. And he's kind of convinced her that she wouldn't really like the city and that they're not missing out on much. And they're living in this home and they don't really get any visitors at all until one night they're looking out the window and they notice the headlights of a car coming their way. So when the stranger comes into this house, he's there to deliver some devastating news. The husband, Junior, has been selected by random lottery to go and work on this space shuttle. And the stranger's not able to give him an exact time of when he's ought to be going or for how long he's going to be gone for. And it just throws everything up into the air. There's nothing he can really do to get out of it. And it seems to go through stages, but he is able to offer the fact that the wife will not be left alone when Junior is away. She is going to be left with someone who's very familiar to her. There's a lot of mystery within this book, and it just follows the trials and tribulations of this married couple. And initially when I started it, I didn't think it was going to be something plot-wise that I was going to gravitate towards, that I was going to be hooked into finding out what happens to these two people, because it is kind of like a mundane storyline of like you're just following this couple through their everyday lives, but then they have this overarching issue of not knowing how their life is going to change based on this information that they've been provided with. I definitely say that this is more of a thriller than a horror novel. I feel like it's been marketed in some ways as a horror novel. It's more of like a thriller / sci-fi novel, and I really, really enjoyed it and I couldn't recommend it enough. The next book that is an absolute new favourite of mine has got to be Lapvona by Otessa Moshfegh. This is my favourite book of hers that I've read so far. This completely blew me away. This was very much my type of book. I feel in some ways that it was like just written purely for me. It's set around a medieval village, and it has a governor and a priest who basically hoard the wealth from the villagers, and they are very exploitative. And it follows a 13-year-old boy who is the son of a shepherd, and his father is very abusive towards him, and he has no idea why. And because he's treated so poorly by his father and by some of the villagers based on how he looks, he really has to take refuge with the local midwife. And there's a lot of weirdness around the midwife because the locals fear her. She lives in a little hut on the outskirt of the woods, and no one really wants to go near her because she is believed to be some sort of witch. She's able to communicate with the natural world. She's able to communicate with the birds. And even though the people respect her and take her word to heart, they still fear her. But the 13-year-old boy doesn't, and he's basically her only companion, and for some reason she still lets him nurse to calm him down and all that sort of thing. There's a lot of weirdness. But what I loved about this book so much was that pretty much every single character was completely unlikable, detestable, horrid. No one really had any redeeming qualities. It has such a strange premise once you actually start getting into the storyline. It also is very, very funny. There was moments where I just laughed out loud because of the ridiculousness of some of the characters, especially the governor. He's something else, really. If you like problematic characters, unreliable narrators, and all that sort of thing set to a medieval background, you should definitely check this one out. Another book that I absolutely loved was The Center by Aisha Siddiqui. This was fantastic. I went into this not really knowing much about it. I believe it's the author's debut novel, and it follows a young woman who works as a translator, and she's in a relationship with a man who seems so brilliant. He's able to pick up new languages like it's nothing to him. He works a really good job, and there's a lot of jealousy within her. Even though he's someone she loves, she just can't understand what makes him so brilliant and what she's doing so different to him, because learning a new language for her would be very important, especially because she wants to be known as a translator of great works. It's really what she wants to dedicate her life to. Over time, he lets slip that he isn't this genius when it comes to languages. He has actually been attending this center, and it's not on Google. There's really nothing you can find online about it. Within 10 days, you're going to be fluent in a language that you choose. And this doesn't seem possible to her. She thinks it's a complete farce. And he says, like, it's a very exclusive club. You know, I can only tell one person that I think would benefit from it. She ends up going to the center. And while she's there, she ends up befriending one of the creators. They're just continuously saying to her, like, you just have to give it time. You have to be patient about it. It's going to click for you in a couple of days. Just trust the process. And the thing about the process is that it isn't just listening to these tapes. They've also forced her to go on a specific diet in order to make this change in her possible. And there's just a load of things that just feel off about this center. So I picked this book up from the library because I'd seen a lot of people saying that it really reads as if it's a Black Mirror storyline. And I have to say, now that I've read it, I completely agree. I could definitely see like some sort of TV show or film adaptation being made of this in the future. I definitely recommend this book, especially if you're someone who's into languages, because it does use and dip in and out of different languages within it. And if you like the idea of the translator premise, especially if you're someone who enjoys reading translations, it kind of puts you into the mind of someone who does that as a living. And it was just kind of fascinating to read about in that respect. And then finally, to wrap up the book segment, is a recommendation for a manga series, which is PTSD Radio. This was absolutely fantastic. It's a really kind of strange premise, but it's a 3-part series. Within the series, you're following a bunch of different characters. It's very episodic in nature. Basically, what will happen is that, you know, someone's just making their commute home after a hard day at work, and they see something or notice something that they find unsettling. It could be a person who's facing into a door in a hallway as if they're meaning to go into the apartment, or as if they're maybe looking through the peephole. And when the person tries to get this thing's attention, they realize this actually isn't a person, it's something else. And it's very much rooted in kind of like folklore and old gods and incurring the wrath of an old god. It was a very creative series to read through. The artwork is very stylized and it's more so cartoonish than I would be used to with the certain manga that I'm used to reading, but I still was able to enjoy it. There were some incredibly disturbing moments. There was some incredibly disturbing artwork in it. The series definitely leans into the nightmare rationale where it may not actually make sense within the real world, but if you think of it as if you're reading a nightmare, it makes kind of perfect logical sense. And I was surprised by how unnerved some of the artwork and some of the storyline was able to make me feel. Now, I will say for volume 3, this was definitely the weakest volume, purely because the author started writing about his own life, about his own sickness, and he felt that at the time that maybe because he's writing these scary stories, he's being punished for it because he ended up having similar symptoms to what some of the characters go through within this. I believe it ended up being an autoimmune disease that he's battling. He's just refusing to go back to revisiting the series or finishing it, which for a reader is very disappointing, but as a human it's completely understandable. This is in chronological order of when it was published, and I wish that they'd made the decision to not do that for the 3rd volume, because you have the actual stories of PTSD Radio sliced in with these autobiographical stories of the author, and it just felt very much all over the place. It would have been probably a better decision to put the author's stuff right at the end, so at least we have like a certain linear feeling to the stories of PTSD Radio. So if you're looking for an alternative to reading nothing but Junji Ito, maybe check out PTSD Radio, because I promise you, you will not be disappointed, at least with the first 2 volumes. So let's get into the film and TV content that I've been really enjoying so far this year. So the first film that really impressed me quite early on in the year was Poor Things. So I went into this not knowing a single thing about it. I didn't even know that it had been based on a book. I just watched it because I really enjoy Emma Stone. I basically just went in because of her and because Willem Dafoe was in it as well. And I feel like I came out of it very shell-shocked and needing to ruminate on it for a couple of days in order to properly form my opinion on it. But thinking back to it now, it's definitely one of my favourite films that I've seen so far this year as an all-rounder. If you're not familiar with this story, it's basically about this young girl who is being trained and looked after by William Dafoe's character, who's this kind of mad scientist figure. He's a doctor, but it's kind of set in the background of this kind of Victorian era, and he brings on the help of a young medical student who's studying under him and tasks him with studying this girl. She seems to have severe arrested development. It's basically the story that follows her throughout her life and her being taken advantage of by certain men, and certain men seeing her as more appealing because of this arrested development. And then as she starts to grow as a person, then that kind of changing. I think the story was absolutely fascinating. The visuals of the film were beautiful. The settings and the costumes were all gorgeous. There was always something there for your eye to take in and enjoy. And I found that I got myself quite desensitized to the many sex scenes quite quickly, so I wasn't feeling somewhat embarrassed watching it. And overall, I really enjoyed the ending. I was like, it felt like a really good for her type of film. If you're someone who's into like the weird girl books and stuff, you're going to enjoy that film. Another film that I thoroughly enjoyed this year so far, and that I was super hyped for, obviously, was Dune 2. So this is basically the second half of the first Dune novel. And I feel like I enjoyed it far more than the first film, maybe because the first film is mostly kind of just setting up a lot of the world building and the characters and their roles within this particular world. Whereas Dune 2 felt more to me like it was kind of better paced and had a much stronger plot to it, because we'd gotten everything that we needed to know out of the way within the first film, and now we were able to watch these characters and actually properly thoroughly enjoy the world that they were in. I felt like when I finished watching that at the cinema, and it was an effort watching that at the cinema because it's such a long film, I felt that within the next couple of days after thinking about it, it was one that I wanted to rewatch almost immediately. And I will probably rewatch the first and second film before the end of the year, just so I have a more cohesive experience with the two films, because I hate when things are split into parts. It drives me mad. But yeah, it was absolutely epic. I feel like it was exactly what Dune fans have wanted for years. And the sound design of this film was absolutely incredible. That's why I feel like there's certain films that I always have to make an effort to go see at the cinema. Because I did my degree in music, I'm really interested in sound design, specifically in Foley and all that sort of thing. And then a couple of weeks ago, I ended up going to see Longlegs, of course. I did not really know much about Longlegs before going into it, aside from all the hype that was around it and knowing that Nicolas Cage plays this really weird character. There were moments in this film that I absolutely loved. I loved the references to the kind of glam rock. I loved the fact that T-Rex and his music was so prominent within the film, and just that nod in particular. I really enjoyed the setup to the film, and there was moments within this that really creeped me out. And I will say, on the day that I went to see it, I was having like a bout of anxiety, and I think because I went into it with that bout of anxiety, it made my viewing experience kind of worse for wear, because I was sitting in the seat like with my shoulders up to my ears and my face covered with my t-shirt because I was so stressed out. I wasn't a huge fan of the ending, to be perfectly honest. The fact that it went kind of far more paranormal than I had anticipated. I thought it was going to be just like a straight up kind of serial killer film, but I just felt a little bit dissatisfied by that, unfortunately. I loved the references to Seven and to Silence of the Lambs. I will say that the pacing of the film is quite slow initially, like we're really slowly but surely kind of getting into the story, and when the moments of unease hit, they hit. There was that kind of home invasion scene within this that I was like, fuck this, fuck you, I want to leave. This is really unnerving the shit out of me. Part of me felt like it needed less long legs, part of me felt like it needed more long legs in certain scenes. And yeah, it's like one of those films that I came out of and I was kind of at war with myself because I was trying to make up my mind on it. Maybe it is one of those films that I definitely need to rewatch, but I think overall for the horror films that I've seen this year, it's definitely been the best horror film that I've seen. Sound design, again, was fantastic. There was such eerie moments within it, and moments that I felt like if I was going to cast my mind back to them at night, I would be kept up because I would be so freaked out by them. Maybe if you're going to watch it, don't watch it by yourself. Have a buddy with you, or a pillow that you can easily pull up in front of your face if you need to. A very different type of horror film from what I was expecting. And even though all the elements weren't, 100% for me, I was still able to enjoy it for what it is, enjoy it for the filmmaking. The overall vibe of the film was something that I just really enjoyed. Now to get into the TV shows, first up we have House of the Dragon. I really struggled to get into the first season of House of the Dragon. I think I was harboring too much resentment after how the TV adaptation of Game of Thrones ended. But rolling on with season 2 coming out in the last couple of months, I was like, hook it to my veins. I want it right now. And it was really difficult to watch week by week, but I was happy to be able to engage within the fandom of it and see other people's theories on what was happening. And I think that was probably one of the most enjoyable things around actually watching the show, was to be able to hop on TikTok and see people's thoughts, or hop on YouTube and see people's breakdowns of each of the episodes. And I feel like it was such a strong season from the very beginning. And every week I couldn't wait for Monday to roll around. And obviously I can revisit it anytime I want because I've got the books, but it just kind of reignited that spark that I had for the series and that particular world. It was like the first fantasy series that I properly ever read, aside from Lord of the Rings, and I just have a lot of nostalgia associated with it. I love the plotting, I love the scheming, I love the shitty characters within it, and in season 2 of House of the Dragons there was a lot of that. There was a lot of backstabbing and treachery afoot. And I completely just ate it all up. And I think what I enjoy about it is that you can't necessarily get behind one particular character and root for them nonstop, because there is this sense that anyone can die at any moment. And I really like that element. I think there's a lot of shows and films that could really take notice of that, of knowing that the sense of risk is there within the characters. And, it's okay to give your readers or your viewers heartbreak from time to time because you've killed off one of their favorite characters, because it makes it more impactful. House of the Dragon, absolutely loved it, can't get enough of it, and I can't believe now that I have to wait 2 years to get another season of it. It's a very depressing thought. I'm like, God, what am I going to do with the next 2 years of my life? A show that I'd like to recommend that I started watching on Netflix is a K-drama, which I've never watched a K-drama before in my life, but it is a show called Happiness. And if you're someone who's into zombies, this might be up your alley because it's an interesting take on zombies. Happiness is set in a post-COVID world, and it's really interesting seeing the characters walk past certain things and you see the COVID signs and stuff like that. Basically, a drug that has affected people to become zombies, but they're able to hold on to their human side and they're able to disguise themselves as still being human unless they're next to blood or unless they're next to water, because I guess they're really dehydrated all the time, and that's when they will change into their kind of like feral selves. It does have like romance elements to it, as like any kind of K-drama would. It does have those kind of specific tropes within it, but I think it was such an interesting take on the zombie genre that I was able to put those elements to the side and forgive like the silliness to it. Every now and again you do find a hidden gem on there, and Happiness is definitely one of them. And then finally, the last TV show that I've really enjoyed getting into this year was Yellow Jackets. So I knew about Yellow Jackets, but it wasn't until I started getting the soundtrack recommended to me on YouTube Music that I was like, oh my God, this has an incredible soundtrack. I probably need to start watching this. And I knew that there were certain actors in it that I have really enjoyed or have been a fan of for quite some time. The only thing that would put me off was the fact that it's split into 2 different time periods, and half of the time period is set when these women are teenagers. It follows these young girls who are in high school who are on a sports team, and they're on their way to nationals. One of the girls' fathers lets them use their private jet to get to the nationals, and the jet goes down and they are stranded in the middle of this forest, and they basically become stranded there for like a year and a half. So the story jumps back from where they are now as grown women who either have families or are still dealing with the fallout and the trauma of going through that 1.5 year period. But part of me thought like this whole show was going to be kind of like Riverdale-ish or be pandering to like young adults. And no, I was surprised that like it wasn't like that at all. I finally got caught up on the 2 seasons. I pretty much binge watched this. It was really annoying that I had it on Now TV, but Now TV only had season 1, so then I had to drop that. I had to get Paramount to watch season 2, so I wasn't too happy about that, especially since I'd forgotten that I'd gone over my free trial on Paramount over the 7 days, and I was just livid that I had to pay for it. But anywho, I got there in the end. It probably cost me far too much money. It's very hard for me to sit down and watch something. I'm very much like all over the place. A lot of the time it's hard for me to buckle down and do anything for like over an hour. So the fact that I can have certain shows that I can just turn on and turn off, it is fantastic. So I'm in my binge watching era now. I want to talk about some of the video games that I've been absolutely loving so far this year. Now I'm a gamer, but I'm not like a hardcore gamer. Like I don't play games every single day. I read every day, but every now and again I will just completely put everything else to the side and focus solely on a video game in order to either complete it or complete it as much as I possibly can. Again, it's another thing for me to distract my busy mind with. So the first game I want to talk about is Stardew Valley. I picked this up on the Switch. I initially had it on PlayStation 4 and I decided that I'd want a portable copy of it because I find it so addictive. And I think it was last Christmas that I ended up getting quite sick, and within that week I put in over 20 hours on this new game and this new farm. Now I haven't picked it up in a while just because I tend to get so addicted to playing it. I find this game so calming. I've always found like farming simulators really relaxing. You know, I was a huge Farmville girl back in the day. I loved Harvest Moon growing up, and I feel like this is probably one of the most perfect kind of farming sim, life sim that there is out there on the market at the moment. It's so calming to just, grow your crops and then sell them, and to help build up the community center and the different important dates of the month where you get to do tasks with the other villagers. It's just so charming. It's so cozy. It's one of those games that you can just pop on at any given time and put some chill music on in the background or have a TV show on and just completely and utterly relax. There are times where this game is not relaxing at all, like when I'm down in the mines fighting for my life. But aside from those times when I'm passing out and being found by various villagers and being brought home or being robbed, it is then a very relaxing game. But I'm so glad that I picked this up on Switch. I'm so glad that I can just play it whenever I feel like, wherever I feel like. It's just a bit of a comfort blanket game for me, to be honest. It's just nice to be able to whip it out and to decompress and just, focus on growing my tomatoes and my green beans and my corn. The next game that has been the only one that I've actually completed so far in 2024 is Super Mario Bros. Wonder. So I got this when it came out, which is something that I rarely do. I rarely ever buy games on launch just because I'm super frugal and I try to get things as cheap as I possibly can. So I usually will wait until there are seasonal sales or there are discount codes. This is one that I knew right away that I wanted to just play over the Christmas, and it took me a significant amount of time to finally complete, but it wasn't until I got COVID again about 2 months ago that I had the time to sit down and finally beat this. So I was a huge platform player when I was growing up. I got a lot of hand-me-down games from my cousins, which included the Mario Land games that I was completely and utterly obsessed with, especially the little pumpkin house where you could go in and play the Halloween variations of the Mario Land games. And seeing the gameplay of this before it came out and knowing that it was going to be something special that we haven't, as Super Mario fans, really experienced in the last couple of years. There's been a lot of ports, there's been a lot of rehashing of the same old. Finally seeing something that had variety and was different, I was like, I need to get this. And it was such an enjoyable experience. It is no wonder that I have serious Joy-Con drift, because the way I was hammering on the Joy-Cons trying to complete this game in the very final rounds of it, it was just so stressful at times. It was so infuriating at times, especially some of the optional levels where you were doing a race against time. I would lose my mind. I would want to throw my Switch out the window at certain points, but as with everything, you just need to get good at it. And I was able to finally really master some of these levels. Obviously, the Wonder Seed element made every level super groovy and super fun. Some of them were incredibly difficult to complete. There's some levels that I still have to go back in order to get every single Wonder Seed, but I feel like this game has a lot of replayability. I still feel like I have years of enjoyment to get from this game. The last Switch game I want to chat about is World of Horror. So this is a game I picked up a couple of months ago. It is very much inspired by the art style of Junji Ito and the stories of H.P. Lovecraft. It is a cosmic horror game where you're someone who has to solve these various mysteries. And a lot of the times these mysteries have very violent elements to them and very violent endings. This is a game where you die a lot and you have to reset a lot. And you get to go through these various mysteries a number of times in order to get the full timelines and in order to be able to complete each pathway of the story, which is something I enjoyed, because I am someone, if I go through a story and I basically pick the wrong version, I am immediately frustrated and I immediately just want to go back. It's also a fairly short game to get through. You can complete it within a couple of hours, but there is a lot of back and forth with going through certain storylines over and over and over again. But through dying, it does give you that leg up on knowing what not to do next time around. So within this, you solve mysteries, you complete puzzles. There's a lot more than meets the eye when you initially start playing this game. It's a very good game. It's very eerie. It has a great vibe to it, especially as a horror fan. So if you're into something that you can play a little bit more casually, this is definitely one to check out. Onto the one thing that I've picked up homeware wise so far this year, and I picked this up pretty recently. Now, I don't really buy homeware until like all the stuff in TK Maxx is out for Halloween. I really don't buy things unless there's a little pumpkin or a little spooky ghost on it for the most part. But I did decide to make a little investment into a projector light. So I decided to pick this up because it's something that I've wanted to have, especially coming up to the winter time when I'm going to be filming after dark, and it's something that I can either put onto my bookshelves or have on the wall behind me that just makes the video a little bit more visually interesting. And I picked this up randomly off of Amazon. They have so many of them on Amazon, but I liked this one because you have the ability to kind of like set it any which way you want, and it has a lot of options and you can control it via an app on your phone. And again, it has quite a calming effect when you have it on in the evening times. I like having it set up to like a galaxy looking color, and I'll just like lie on my bed reading, and I just feel very relaxed and at one with the universe. And I'm really looking forward to being able to make a couple of videos, you know, after dark and testing it out then, because I haven't properly like set it up yet for in a filming situation. But yeah, that's something that I'm just like weirdly excited about. And then finally, the last things that I want to talk about is events that I've gone to so far this year. So I have gone to a couple of gigs, and I will say that my top 3 favorites so far this year was seeing Judas Priest in February, seeing Tenacious D then I think in April or May, and then finally seeing my all-time favorite band, the Smashing Pumpkins, in June. That was probably the best gig that I've been to in quite some time, especially since their support act was Weezer. So basically Weezer played for like an hour and 10 minutes and then the Smashing Pumpkins played for 2 hours. The Tenacious D gig was fantastic. It was so entertaining. The support act was terrible, but the actual act itself was great and well worth the money. We had been talking about Tenacious D, and a lot of people who I talked to about, they're like, oh, I'm not going because I've seen them before and stuff, but I'd never seen them. And knowing what I know now, I am so glad I was able to see them when I did. They're one of those bands that I know all the songs off by heart to, and it was just a fantastic gig. And then Judas Priest in February were also fantastic. They played a very short set. I feel like they only played about 7 or 8 songs. And then seeing the Smashing Pumpkins, which was like a dream come true, I absolutely loved every moment of it. Their set list was incredible. It was a really good mix of old and new. They played all my favorite songs. My favorite song is Mayonnaise, and they played it and I almost started crying because it's just one of those songs that moves me. Seeing them in the flesh finally after being fans of them for absolute years was just so invigorating and so inspiring and all that sort of thing. Well worth the COVID that I came down with later in the week for. So those have been my mid-year favorites. Let me know what you've been really enjoying so far this year, and if there's anything else that you're looking forward to that hasn't yet come out yet, such as movies or book releases or what have you. If you want to keep up with me outside of YouTube, you can always follow me on my TikTok and my Instagram, where I make short form bookish content that I don't necessarily share over here. And if you haven't done so already, feel free to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and I greatly appreciate it. And as always, I hope you enjoy this video and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.